Hello everyone, and Grandmaster Damian Lemos here for TheChessWorld.com. Welcome to a new course. This time we'll focus on the O'Kelly Sicilian for black. And let me tell you, I love the Sicilian because it's easy to play. It's based on concepts and ideas, unlike other Sicilians like the Dragon, Najdorf, Paulsen, Taimanov, you name it. In those Sicilians, you have to be updated every single day. You have to be on top of theory. And the other thing is, even if you know the theory, you're defending most of the time. When you play the O'Kelly Sicilian, which is, so I'll show you here, e4, c5, knight f3, a6. When you play this Sicilian, in a way, you're making your life easier because there's less theory. And as we'll see, we'll get a nice and easy setup for black to play. So hopefully that intro was a good one to convince you uh, of the reasons why to play the Sicilian as black. But now let's get down to the moves and why we should play the O'Kelly Sicilian. So after a6, what black's trying to do is he wants to play a Najdorf Sicilian in better circumstances. So in order to understand this, I'll show you the Najdorf Sicilian first, and then I'll show you one of the main lines in the O'Kelly Sicilian, and you'll see a difference. So when black wants to play the Najdorf, or Dragon, or a classical Sicilian, black goes d6. So white plays the open Sicilian with d4, take, knight takes d4, knight to f6, we attack the pawn, white plays knight to c3, and here black plays a6. This is the Najdorf Sicilian. And just a quick mention of why the Najdorf is so good. The reason black plays a6 is because he wants to stop bishop b5 check. Black, he would love to play something like e5 right away. Problem is, after e5, white could move the knight back. However, playing bishop b5 check is even stronger, because now, if we go bishop d7, we can take, and then he can play knight f5. Now, after trading bishops off, we can tell white got our best bishop. We're left with bishop f8, which is a bit questionable. It's not as powerful as bishop c8 is. On top of that, white has got full control of light squares, and eventually he could even try placing a knight in the outpost on d5. As it usually happens in Sicilian, d6 is a weakness, so clearly the bishop's trade is helping white. That's why e5 here is not great because of bishop b5 check. That's been the case for decades. Nowadays, you'll find some games where black tries e5 with new ideas, but in a nutshell, after bishop b5 check, white's better. That is the reason why black plays Najdorf, because after a6, oops, sorry about the arrow here, after a6, we keep an eye on b5. Now bishop b5 check is not even possible, and then depending on what white does, e5 is likely to happen. And there's no bishop b5 check, and black gets better ways to get pieces out. Maybe we can fight for d5 as well. So that's essentially the main reason behind the Najdorf. Now, of course, if you follow former world champion Garry Kasparov's games, you'll find a lot of games where black plays with e6 as well, but at any rate, black does play a6. So, with all of this being said, let me show you the beauty of the O'Kelly Sicilian, because if we go a6 right away, then d4 is not a great move for white. As we'll study throughout the course, there are other lines for white. There are other main lines, such as playing c3, trying to go c4 from a rook bind. But if white goes d4, and I'm sure this is what our opponents are likely to play, if they don't know any theory, they'll go d4, they'll go for the open Sicilian. So here we'll take. Now white is going to play knight takes, queen takes. There's another thing. When we play the old Kelly, white cannot go for queen takes d4 because we go knight c6, and unlike lines where black has a pawn on d6, bishop b5 is not even possible here. He's not pinning the knight. He cannot get away with this development move. He has to move the queen again, and he's just wasting valuable development tempi. So coming back to a6, let's go to the main line of this chapter. And by the way, this is what's likely to happen in our games. White goes d4, we take, white plays knight takes d4, and here, unlike the Najdorf Sicilian, we can play without d6. We can play knight f6 right away. We attack the pawn on e4, and now you're probably wondering what happens if white plays e5. That's the reason why black plays d6. Well, if white goes e5 here, then we go queen a5 check, and this is essentially losing for white, because once we get the center pawn, in the long run, we're going to win with the extra pawn. So white's in trouble here already. He's got nothing to stop queen takes e5 check. So we've got another nice opening trap here after knight f6. So white usually goes knight c3 here, mimicking what white does in the open Sicilian. And now we don't have to play d6. We could. That transposes into the Najdorf Sicilian. But here we can play e5 right away. So there's some differences here between the O'Kelly main line and the Najdorf. And the main one, in my opinion, is the fact our bishop can still come out via c5 or b4. We haven't played d6 yet. We may or may not play it. In some lines, we might even go for d5 right away. But I think, again, the main difference is the fact bishop f8 is ready to come out via c5 or b4. So this is one of the lines we'll analyze later on throughout this course. And I think this is the line I have to show first, because this is what we essentially trying to do when we play the O'Kelly Sicilian. Now, let's see some sublines from white. So let's do a refresh. Okay, so e4, c5, knight f3, a6. So we'll see some lines where white plays d4, take, knight takes d4, knight f6. So on top of knight c3, there's also bishop to d3. This is, I would say, second best approach for white. Just getting the bishop out, trying to castle kingside as soon as possible. It's not going to give white an advantage, but at least he's getting his pieces out. If he goes e5, we know we've got queen a5 check. That wins. If he goes f3, this is slightly dubious as well, because he hasn't played knight c3 yet. So here we could even go e5 and d5. We free up our position soon. And if he's not careful, I mean, knight b3 might be slightly better than knight e2. We might even take this diagonal, and white is already in big, big trouble. So I wouldn't consider f3 here for white. It's either bishop d3 or knight c3. So we'll start off with bishop d3 first. So after bishop d3, there are two solutions for black here. One of the games you'll find, actually it's the first game you'll find in the PGN files, is Johansson against Bartel. We see this line played by a 2600 Grandmaster, so that says a lot about the O'Kelly system. And in that game, black plays e5, which I think it's a great approach. It follows the spirit of the O'Kelly Sicilian, because after all, we want to get bishop f8 out as well. So we'll get to e5 soon. The other line I really like, and this is a Sicilian concept that applies to other lines as well. When white plays bishop d3 and knight d4 is no longer protected, we can consider knight c6 as well. Now, good news is that we're getting a piece out for free. We're attacking knight d4 because that knight is no longer protected. So I don't think white's interested in moving that knight back. So he's likely to take. And now we can take, both ways are fine. If we take with the side pawn towards the center, that's usually a good thing because then we can support d5. We get a b file as well. But here, since I don't see any action going on in the center, I don't see white attacking us anytime soon, I would take with the d pawn. Now, we might play bishop g4, knight g4 at some point. e5 still loses a pawn to queen a5 check. If he castles, we can play e5. This is a nice position for black because bishop d3, if you look at it, bishop d3, it's not a bad bishop per se, but it is crashing into the pawn structure. Bishop c1 happens to be a better bishop for white, but if he goes bishop e3, then he already has to deal with stuff like knight g4. Then we can go bishop c5, queen h4. Not easy to handle for white. If he goes bishop g5, I would even go bishop e7. And I'm just playing random moves here, but I want to show you a concept. Let's say I go something like this, and I get the bishop trade. Now, we swapped bishops off. We know the bishop c1 was better for white than bishop d3. And now we get a game where bishop c8 is fantastic. We'll get a lot of free diagonals for that bishop, and we'll dominate on dark squares. Whilst bishop d3 is struggling to find purpose in this game. So there are many lines here, but overall, you have to know that black starting from a solid foundation, and this is equal to say the least. I think here, if we get positions like this one where white takes on c6, we play d takes, or we get structures like this one, I think potentially black is even better. So that's a simple solution. If he goes bishop d3 here, so a6, knight d4, knight f6, yep, bishop d3. So knight c6 is a safe and sound approach for black. Now, coming back to this game, you'll find in the PGN files Johansson against Bartel. Black goes e5, and this line shows the spirit of the O'Kelly Sicilian, because we'll try getting bishop f8 out. So in this game, after e5, white plays knight to b3. Now, there's another game where white played knight to f3. And here, there's an interesting move for black, because if you think about it, knight takes e5 is not even a threat yet, because if he takes on e5, we play queen a5 check, and we win. So here, if we go d6, we're actually transposing into a Najdorf, where white has the bishop on d3, which is a great Najdorf for black. Knight c6 looks great. Could go queen c7 as well. But if we want to give our opponent the chance to go wrong and take the pawn on e5, then h6 looks nice as well, because we stop him from playing bishop g5. And bishop g5 might be an interesting move for white, because if he gets the trade, then he gets the outpost on d5 as well for the knight. So h6 makes sense. Castles. Here, black goes knight c6. And notice that black hasn't played d6 yet. What black's going to do is he wants to get the bishop out, and then he'll play d6. So here we got everything we can ask for in a Sicilian for black. We getting the bishop out before playing d6. We managed to play h6, so white won't be able to exploit the d5 square, the outpost, Plus, if white goes for a Maroczy bind, which is what happened in this game, then we're likely to get this trade, bishop c1, the swap bishop c1 in exchange for bishop c5, and then white's going to end up with the worst bishop. Bishop c8 is going to be a good one, and hopefully we'll be able to maneuver on dark squares. Just to show you a sample line, let's say, I mean, it's not easy to come up with a sample line because queen e2 I think is terrible. I'm trying to get the bishop trade here. The thing is, queen e2, I can just go bishop g4, and knight d4 is such a massive threat here. Oof. Okay, so with that clarified, we know bishop g4 is the move for black, but let's say I play a quiet move, I castle. Just want to show you what could happen here after the trade. I could trade right away, but I think that might even help white. If he takes with a pawn, then he gets to control the d4 square. So let's say I play bishop g4 here, he takes. We can see that we're clearly dominating on dark squares, and we can tell how bad bishop d3 is. So this is something I wouldn't recommend for white, and we have potentially a lot of positions where we end up with a better bishop. So this is good to know. Let's see what happened in this game. So in this game, as we were saying, after bishop d3, e5. So here, sorry, white didn't play knight b3. In the first game, we're following white played knight f3. We get h6. We get our knight out. So the same goes for our bishop. And then white plays h3. Fair enough. He wants to stop bishop g4. Now I know we are diverting a little bit here because the opening is almost finished. And if we castle, if we get our pieces out, we just got a nice position out of the opening. That being said, since our king's still in the center, we could consider g5 and g4. I believe that's much better for black, especially because we got the bishop out as well. So in practice, I would say white's in trouble here if we go g5, which is fire, and we could even consider castling queenside here. It's too much for white to deal with because that pawn h3 makes it easier for us to open up the kingside, and bishop c5 is going to help a lot in the kingside attack. So I'll show you quickly what happened in this game, and then we'll move to the knight b3 one. So h3 here, black castled, white plays a3. Not a big deal. If it goes b4, we can just hide the bishop on a7. So we keep on getting our pieces out. Fine, queen e2. And here, knight d4 would be good to trade pieces off, and we've got no issues whatsoever. In this game, black played knight to h5, which I like as well, because we want to go knight f4, and we want to get his best bishop. So here, white starts playing a bit passive, I would say. Knight f4. Now, white has to take. If he doesn't, then we get a powerful knight on f4 for free. And here, in the long run, we know dark squares are gonna be a decisive factor. Again, bishop d3, not a good bishop. So here, you'll notice that if you look at this with the engine, you'll see that the engine says this is more or less equal. However, the bishop pair is something that gives us a big advantage, and it's much easier to play for black. So you can check this game out. In fact, let's see what happened. White could have played better at many points in this game, but just one mistake, one inaccuracy like rook f1, and already black is much better. Because here, again, dark squares are ours, and we can even post a bishop on e5, try f3, queen h4. Look at our bishops. Our bishops are sharp here. So That's essentially what happened in this game. Now we attack the pawn f2 as well. This is a dream Sicilian, by the way. Rook d2, bishop e5, and here white, for some reason, fell for this basic tactic and resigns f3. Had he played f3, we're still fully dominating on dark squares, so sooner or later, I'm sure black would find a way to convert the advantage. So yeah, terrible, terrible outcome for white. So let's take a look at the other move here. Once knight f6, once white plays knight to b3. So after knight to b3, I would say the only difference here, and what's good for white, is the fact we cannot play bishop c5. So that's probably the benefit to playing knight b3 for white. As we'll see, we can still get a nice position out of the opening here by just getting our pieces out. So in this game, black decided to transpose into a Najdorf setup, which is fine, of course, because here we were playing a Najdorf where white played bishop d3 already, which is not the most popular approach against the Najdorf. Usually white goes for bishop e2. From e2, the bishop controls key squares on the king side. It also keeps an eye on d5. Bishop d3 is alright, there's nothing wrong with that. But then it's probably easier for us to finish our development. And as you'll see in this game, black got a nice position out of the opening. We could add h6 as well, if allowed, to stop bishop g5. Although here, in this particular position, if white goes bishop g5, I wouldn't be concerned about it because the trade is something we can deal with. The fact we got the bishop pair helps us compensate for the fact he's controlling the d5 square. So in a way, we are playing a Najdorf here, where white has the bishop on d3. So if you like the Najdorf, if you play the Najdorf, then you'll find these positions easy to play. So conclusion here would be, in this line, where we go a6, d4 takes, knight takes d4, knight f6. After bishop d3, knight c6 is easy to play, I think. But to be honest, I would probably go for knight c6 for a simple reason. White has nothing better than taken, and then this position is risk-free. We're likely to get positions with the bishop trade. That's good for us. And we can outplay our opponent later on. I don't mind playing a dry position, so long as we equalize and get, a safe and sound middle game. So knight c6 is the easy approach. Now e5, I think it's easy as well, but then you have to be familiar with Najdorf setups after knight b3. If you goes knight f3, then I really like this game where black played h6. And yeah, conclusion is both lines are fine. It's probably a matter of taste. So with this, I'll finish this chapter. I think it works well as an intro to the O'Kelly Sicilian. And of course, as we move on, we'll analyze more and more lines. So that's going to be it for this one. I hope you found this useful. I hope you could learn something. And of course, I want to see you guys on the next one. Thank you.